Welcome, everyone, to Asian Pacific Voices Radio, where you'll find stimulating conversations that explore diverse topics and stories impacting our Asian Pacific American communities. I'm your host, Joanne Whitlock, and today we're excited to welcome an esteemed educator and music director with a passion for promoting Filipino diasporic performing arts. With over 30 years of experience, his journey as an adjunct faculty member at Miramar College and as a music director for the Samahan Filipino-American Performing Arts and Education Center has been nothing short of inspiring. So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Bernard Ellorin on Asian Pacific Voices Radio. Hi, Bernard.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me here.
Yes, I'm really excited to talk with you today. I love meeting other Filipinos, so it's always a great pleasure when we have a guest that's a Filipino. Filipino-American myself, so spent my childhood in the Philippines, and I love hearing stories like yours. I'd love to get to know you a little bit personally before we get into your actual work and what you do. So first, tell us about your life growing up. Can you share, whether in the Philippines or here, can you share a fond childhood memory that first sparked your interest in music or performing arts?
So I'm actually a 1.5 generation Filipino-American, born in the Philippines and raised here in the United States. Although I did come here at a young age, I would say I was blessed with learning about different Philippine cultural arts and practices growing up and traditions that my family's practice in terms of instilling sense of filial piety and a lot of traditions honoring, a lot of cultural arts. As a child, I got involved in music at the age of 10. Like any Asian American child, their parents will force them to take piano lessons. So I was one of those children that my mom wanted me to learn about music. And at the same time, she was also interested in the arts as well. So she wanted me to learn an aspect about Philippine culture through music and dance. And that's when, at the age of 10, I learned how to play music with the Samahan Philippine Dance Company, now known as Samahan Performing Arts. And growing up, I lived in Southeast San Diego in Paradise Hills, but I was always bused through different magnet programs to schools in Point Loma and in University City near La Jolla. And so I've always felt the need to kind of represent and tell people about my heritage, where I was born and what I've been raised with. So yeah, and of course during the 80s and 90s there was a lack of representation, and it's only fairly recently that Filipinos are starting to become recognized for their contributions to arts and entertainment, but back then there wasn't much. So Samahan Performing Arts was definitely an outlet for me to learn and feel seen and heard as a Filipino American.
I love that. I'm actually pretty jealous because what you said, most Asian families, they kind of force music on you at a young age. Like you, I learned piano when I was a kid, but then I was so stubborn that I wish I had stayed with it. I kind of fought it, I think, because of all the pressure. But so I love that you stuck with it. And I really like that even though you moved here at a young age, that you really kept the culture as a big part of you. You don't see that. Sometimes you don't see that, when immigrants come here and then their children, it starts to fade away. Their culture starts to fade away. So I love that it's still such a big, important part of you. Speaking of that, though, what are some of the cultural influences and traditions from your upbringing that you think have had a lasting impact on your life? I know you kind of mentioned it. It was your mom, bringing you around to the different magnet schools, but were there anything specific that actually has a lasting impact on your career in both music and academia?
Just being exposed to a variety of traditions and musics. So my mother and as well as my grandmother and different members of my family exposed me to a variety of classical, contemporary, as well as Philippine folk and contemporary songs. So they would play a lot of recordings at home. And so that sparked my interest in music that I was learning while I was in Samahan, and then it expanded my horizons to learn about different groups and traditions. So I guess being exposed to music casually by my elders kind of influenced my taste and my upbringing, growing up. And then also being surrounded by a neighborhood that had a mixed population of Filipinos, Blacks, and Latinos, Mexicans in particular. So that kind of had a lot of influence, and it made me develop a more worldly understanding and tolerance for different traditions and ethnicities, and always having that level of respect for many cultures and my elders.
Yeah, that really shows the importance of having a community and having a worldly experience. I like that. Again, it's not something everybody learns from a young age, and you just kind of naturally got all these life lessons about, inclusivity and diversity. Probably
Hmm.
not even realizing it. That's so important now. So that's really cool to hear. So now that I know a little bit more about your background and your, family history and kind of how you got to where you are, is there a memorable experience from I know you were a research fellow, right? Was there a memorable experience from your time as a research fellow with the Fulbright program? I think you were mentioned conducting like a comparative study on contemporary music in Malaysia in Batangas City, which I was just in Batangas earlier this month, by the way.
Oh yeah. So my whole study for the Fulbright was doing a comparative study on Sama Bajau music in Semporna settlement, Sabah, Malaysia, and Batangas City, Philippines. So the Sama Bajau, they're a transmigrant ethnic minority that traverses the waterways between the Sulu and the Celebes Sea. And my interest in that culture all started when I was learning about Southern Philippine gong ensemble music that was based in one specific island in the Southern Philippines, which is Mindanao. And I wanted to venture further into learning about traditions from the strip of islands known as the Sulu Archipelago. And the Sama people sparked my interest because the first musician from those strip of islands was a Sama musician, the late Ta'ala Manandao. And then during my research, I noticed that a lot of the music's traditional gong chime ensembles were now being synthesized into the electronic keyboard that produces multiple sounds. And I'd say probably the most memorable event that happened there at the time when I was on my Fulbright was there was this thing called the Lahad invasion, where there was some rebels who said they were trying to claim Sabah for the Sulu Sultanate. But that happens a lot. There's a lot of insurgents who try to state that claim, but not really being direct descendants from the Sulu Sultanate. So at the time, in 2013, that was kind of a huge problem because they were starting to like check people's immigrant documents in that region, and there was a lot of instability. And it was sort of kind of a hot red zone at the time while I was conducting research. So a lot of was at stake. But thankfully enough, things turned out all right, and I managed to safely complete all of my dissertation research on the comparative contemporary music industries found in both Malaysia and the Philippines. And then one thing that I addressed was how different entities are sponsoring the Sama Bajau. So a lot of tourist destinations in Sabah, Malaysia sponsor them as an attraction. And then there was also a born again Christian ministry that was helping
Hmm.
a lot of the Sama Bajau who were mendicants. They were actually seen as buskers, they were busking musicians. And so I documented that in my dissertation. And so that's sort of one of the most memorable moments, was kind of seeing those two extremes happening at the same time.
So when you were doing your dissertation, was it any actual field work? Did you actually go to Malaysia and the Philippines, do research, or
Yeah,
well, that's very
I
cool.
I got a Fulbright fellowship to conduct research in both countries.
And how long did that whole process take you? How long did that whole research program take you with Fulbright?
It took me about over a year to complete.
Okay.
Mm.
Like I said, I was just in Batangas, and I feel like I'm learning a lot, like listening to you. I went to school in the Philippines, took history in the Philippines, but I just learned quite a bit just from that little snippet. So thanks for that. So your academia part, we talked about your academia. So in addition to being an educator at Miramar College, you mentioned you also serve as a music director for the Samahan Filipino-American Performing Arts and Education Center. So with those two, can you share any insights or any advice and listeners on how you manage your time and responsibilities between those two very separate roles, but ensuring that you also have time for your family, personal pursuits? How do you handle that work-life balance? Because it seems like that would take up a lot of your day between those two and your personal life.
At the moment, I'm actually taking a temporary leave of absence from my duties as a music director. So I'm basically focusing on teaching. So I would make sure to prioritize what's like most pressing at the moment and what has, a deadline. So I would also try to make sure that I would leave at least 2 days out of the week to for myself and for self-care, and also to spend time with my family. That's one way of doing it. Another way is just to really kind of start my day meditating about like what exactly do I need to accomplish throughout the day, and kind of map it out that way. And so whatever comes from the heart, where it's like, this is what I need to accomplish, then that's how I set about doing it. So that ultimately kind of defines how I stagger my days and my activities.
So like managing priorities, I kind of
Mhm.
there's a metaphor about like the closest alligator to the boat. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Like if you're in a
Oh,
boat
yeah,
in a
no.
river, then the closest alligator is trying to prioritize. So, what do you teach?
So at Miramar College, I teach music survey courses. So I teach introduction to music, history of rock and roll, and world music. And that's what I usually do as an adjunct faculty. And then for Samahan Performing Arts, I've mainly been giving private instruction, both in person and online. So the pandemic established an online platform for me to teach students um, private lessons on Kulintang gong ensemble music, as well as rondalla music, the stringed ensemble that we're going to talk about later. So I've just been teaching mainly private instructions, and also, my regular music survey courses uh, with Miramar.
I love that you're able to take your passion and and actually do your career with it. Some people, their work and what their personal passions are don't usually combine like that, and you've been able to do that. So not everybody is that fortunate. So, what inspired your passion to educate other Filipino Americans and even non Filipino American communities on Filipino diasporic performing arts over the past, I guess, 30 years now?
Quite honestly, there is a lack of representation in our discipline of ethnomusicology and music education, and there's a lack of scholars, Filipino American scholars, doing work in music or ethnomusicology. Obviously, because of the pressures of our working class parents who prefer jobs that are not necessarily within the arts and humanities. So, growing up at a young age, having a deep appreciation for musics of the Philippines and the Filipino American diaspora, and then noticing within my own discipline the lack of representation as well as the interest. There still remains a lack of interest in different institutions. And so I've been working with a group of close colleagues and friends to be that accessible resource, because it fills that void that many Filipino Americans have when it comes to having accessible resources on their cultural practices and the arts. So that's what inspired me most, is due to the lack of representation and then the lack of resources.
I love it. You're definitely like an advocate. You're definitely like moving forward with our representation, because yeah, definitely earlier in even 2000s, kind of more my time, there's definitely not that level of representation in Asian Americans, definitely not Filipinos. So I love that you are continuing the strong fight and, getting us out there. So I want to go back to what you were talking about with the ensemble music. Can you describe the significance and cultural importance of traditional Philippine rondalla and Kulintang ensemble music, especially when in the context of Southern California, where we both are?
So these ensembles are the most well known in Philippine music or ethnomusicology. I would say rondalla because it's coming from the lowland Philippine majority who are living in different parts of Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. And a lot of Filipino-Americans see rondalla music as a form of nostalgia because during the American occupation, that was the form of music that was used for secondary music education. So it has a lot of Spanish influence, but then the Filipinos, they Filipinized it in the process by playing a lot of the traditional melodies that were originally vocal musics, and they transposed it onto the rondalla. And then the Kulintang ensembles, they're part of the Philippines' indigenous maritime Southeast Asian heritage. So a lot of Filipino Americans use it as or play the music or practice the music as their quote unquote decolonization process. And so for Southern California, there's different subcultures who are familiar with both genres or they have the choice of either performing one or both. And a lot of Filipino American musicians here in Southern California gravitate towards either one. And then members in my Kulintang ensemble in Southern California, there's some who are well versed, like myself, in both traditions. And it's really an outlet to really embrace your heritage and culture and also respect the diversity of Philippine culture. Because in the Philippines, Filipino is really a nationality, not necessarily an ethnicity. It's only here in the United States where it's an ethnicity. And learning about the diversity of Philippine culture, there's over 106 ethno-linguistic groups. So learning something that's not necessarily mainstream or is still very much indigenous is really a way in which we develop a sense of tolerance and understanding of diverse music traditions found throughout the archipelago.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that because this is a very educational interview. So I'm really excited that we're having this discussion because mainstream people don't realize that there's more to Philippines than the Spanish history, and so I really enjoy hearing you kind of keeping with traditional Filipino, before pre-Spanish colonialism, because that's gone, that's kind of has faded away with all that, and kind of with the ethno-linguistic that you're talking about. So when I go home to the Philippines, I go to my family in the province in the Visayan. I speak Tagalog, they speak Visayan, and that's two completely different languages, despite not being that far away. So, and that's something that not a lot of people realize is how diverse just within the Philippines Filipinos are. So, I love that you are educating our listeners on a little bit on Filipino culture. So tell me more about, so you're a master artist under the Alliance for California Traditional Arts, correct? The apprenticeship? What was under that, what were some of the most valuable lessons that you imparted to your apprentices while you were mastering indigenous gong music from the Southern Philippines?
I think the biggest lesson that I instilled in many of my students, my apprentices, were this repertoire is a living tradition. And it's coming from a communal tradition where there's multiple artists who have their own rendition or own style or version of playing traditional repertoire. And so here in the United States, I'm only teaching you a small fraction of what I've had the privilege of studying with cultural practitioners who have entrusted me with this information. Both of my apprentices, they had their own different experiences. So, for example, my first apprentice, who was Kim Kalanduyan, she was actually the eldest grandchild of my Kulintang teacher who passed away in 2016. And that was a way of reconnecting with her ancestral roots and then studying the repertoire that she hardly had a chance to study because she only learned Kulintang music once from her grandfather. And then to continue it on, we've developed a close friendship with each other. She saw this learning this repertoire as a valuable experience. And then the second apprentice, Rajel Zamora, he wants to learn a variety of genres of Philippine music to make it accessible in our educational system. So I used it as an opportunity to further hone his skills in learning a diverse array of Philippine musics because he himself wants to be that worldly instructor for a lot of secondary schools who are unfamiliar with the genres of music. So the biggest lesson I instilled is the importance and context behind every single piece and genre of music that they're studying with me.
And where are they in their journey with this? So they've been your apprentice. Like, how long have they been under you as an apprentice, and where are they kind of in their musical journey?
So I think within a span over the past, I'd say 5 to 8 years, they've been expressing themselves with the music, continuing to practice what I've taught them, either in a performance space or through educational settings, and also kind of expanding further on the art form or kind of taking a more holistic approach to exploring different other aspects of art and culture. So I believe Rajel, he's now working with the Center for World Music, teaching grade school children about Philippine music. And then Kim, she has her own clothing line called Native Filipiniana, which you should definitely explore if you're into fashion and textiles. And at the same time, she's continuing promoting the music. So that's where they are. And I'm proud of them kind of finding themselves through the arts and culture.
Great. Awesome. Thank you for that. So clearly very, very involved in promoting Filipino performing arts, diaspora performing arts. So with that, like, how do you believe preserving traditional Filipino music benefits and resonates with all the younger generations in the United States?
It's an opportunity and an introductory point to learning about their culture as a whole. I mean, it's a tangible resource. Until now, we're still making progress of being represented in the media and entertainment. So having traditions and culture that is accessible, it makes them feel seen and heard. And there is a resource that's available. So being there, learning traditional music is one aspect of learning about Philippine culture and its diverse genres or diverse traditions. And a lot of the music is a communal affair. So you learn about building camaraderie, solidarity, and kapwa, awareness of each other, and like what you contribute when you're performing music. So I think Philippine music offers that to all of our youth.
I love it. That definitely speaks home to me. So, but with that though, promoting music, have you faced challenges though when in kind of like your pursuit in promoting indigenous Philippine music?
Absolutely, it's still an uphill battle because there's still a lot of institutions that still stick to the canon of what constitutes as world music or Western art music. And so Philippine music is still very much on the periphery in ethnomusicology. And I'm still having to constantly explain myself, constantly explain the difference on why this is distinctly a Filipino music genre as opposed to something that's inspired or similar to. And I have to constantly educate and explain to people that it's part of the Philippines ethnic and regional identities, and at the same time it's unique to the archipelago, and it may sound familiar, Spanish, Indonesian, or whatever, but in the end it's very distinct to a specific part of the world. So I still have I'm it's still very much an uphill battle trying to justify and at the same time promote. in different spaces, especially academic institutions that still stick very much to what they're familiar with in their institutions and what they choose to educate their students.
Right. And I think I speak for all Filipinos when I say thank you so much for you and your endeavors and your pursuits and putting us out in the forefront, and you continue to do this for so many years. So I appreciate that. I do have one last question for you. I know we're almost out of time here, but I have just a quick, fun question. If you could collaborate with any musician, living or deceased, on a performance, a recording project, who would it be?
So there's two people that really come to mind. So Alfredo Buenaventura, he composed a lot of the Philippine dance musics that the rondalla ensembles plays. I'd love to collaborate with him. And then a musician that passed away about a few years ago, he played this traditional stringed lute from the Maguindanao people in Mindanao in the southern Philippines called a kutiapi. I would love to be on a recording with him someday. I would have loved to be on a recording with him for Maguindanao music.
That's awesome. I love hearing your passion. You can hear the passion in your voice talking about Filipino music and indigenous music. So I love that. Well, Bernard, that was a quick interview that went by fast, but that's all the time we have. But before we go, I do want to share with our listeners, do you have a website or any kind of social media handle that we can share with everybody listening so that they can learn more about you and what you do? I know there's a lot more than what we talked about in this episode today, and I'd really love to promote and advertise that.
Yeah, my name's on LinkedIn, Bernard Ellorin, and then for my Kulintang Instagram handle, it's Pakaragyan. I know it's a lengthy spelling. P as in Paul, AKARAGUIAN, all lowercase, underscore Kulintang, KULINTANG underscore ensemble. Everything is lowercase. That's our IG handle. And then check out Samahan Dance on Instagram. That's the nonprofit that I'm a music instructor for with rondalla and Kulintang music.
Awesome. Yeah, we will definitely share both those handles with this episode so that everybody can go follow you. Well, with that, thank you so much, Bernard, and for joining me on today's show. And like I said, that was very, very educational for me. So I'm sure it's very educational for all our listeners. So I really appreciate having you on the show.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. And thanks again for inviting me to be part of your interview.
And to all our listeners, we'd also love to hear from you about any suggestions for future guests or topics that you may have. So don't forget to subscribe to our program on your favorite podcast platform and follow us on Facebook, Twitter/X, Instagram, and our YouTube channel. Asian Pacific Voices Radio is produced by Asian Culture and Media Alliance, a nonprofit that empowers the Asian Pacific American communities with a voice through media arts. If you'd like to support our program, please visit AsianPacificVoicesRadio.com. Until next time.